Okay, good afternoon, honorable members of parliament, ladies and gentlemen. This session, as you all know, is focused on mining, which for many of our countries is a burning issue, understanding the role of parliamentarians in mining contracts. I must say for Zambia, this is a huge, huge issue for us. So to kick off this session, I've got Mukupa here who is going to come and just give us a background to it before we ask our presenter to do his presentation. Mukupa.
Thank you, Mr. Dodia. A pleasant, good afternoon to the honorable members in this room. Really, really exciting to have you here. My name is Mukupa Nsenduluka, and I work for Tax Justice Network Africa, and I lead the work on tax and natural resource governance. So just in terms of giving a brief overview of this session, we are going to be looking at a very, very pertinent issues related to mining contracts. As you know, mining or extractive industries, whether it's mining oil and gas, is something that most of our countries are doing. How many of us come from mining countries? Just whether you have a bit of gold, minerals, and other things, oil, gas. Okay, so all of us are from mining countries, or at least producing oil and gas. From Zambia, we've been mining for 100 years. Now that you're in Zambia, does this country look like the wealth of the 100 years is reflected in what you're seeing? Nothing, eh? Yeah. And this is why we are here. We are saying as Tax Justice Network Africa that the revenues from mining or the extractive industry has not worked for this continent. And the issue we try to address is why. We've been mining for 100 years. We've been polluting the environment. We've been digging big holes. But when you go to the communities actually that have these mining projects, you find that they're even worse off than what we have in Lusaka, isn't it? And I think that's a reality in most of our countries. So this session basically is trying to look at the issue of mining contracts, because when you look at the extractive value chain, it's the contract, it's getting a good deal that translates into us getting the right revenues from the sector and also investing in the developmental needs of our countries. So if you as parliamentarians who sit in these mining committee agreements, you are the ones who have the power to decide whether a company should mine or not, know what mining contracts are about and why we should look into issues around tax incentives or some of the issues related to revenues collected. It all starts from the contract, is what I'm saying. If we can get a good contract, if we can get a good deal, then we'll be able to get good investments that will finance our development. So for this session, we have Mutuso. I don't know if the IT team has the presentation up. Team IT? Okay. We have Mutuso who will walk us through what it really means in terms of mining contracts. So we are going to attempt to understand what a mining contract is, and he'll walk us through some of the things that you as parliamentarians need to know before you sign those contracts, but also we'll discuss together, and this is a discussion, we'll discuss together some of the challenges you face and some of the policy asks that you need to be putting before in Parliament to ensure that your contracting processes are done properly. So without wasting much time, I'm going to call upon Mutuso, who will walk us through this short presentation, and then we'll have a very interactive session. So please just, if you have any questions, any comments, I kindly ask that you wait for him to finish, and then we can have an interactive session. The goal after this is to ensure that when we go back to our countries, we can see how best to strengthen our mining contracts processes through the mining committees that you sit in. Thank you. So over to you, Mutuso.
Thank you very much, Mukupa, for that introduction. So let me also start by saying good afternoon, honorable members of Parliament. I said good afternoon. Yeah, that's much better, because I felt unwanted by the first response that you gave. And I was attributing that maybe to the fact that I said I'm an aspiring member of Parliament. And there are actually elections coming in Zimbabwe, so some members here may not be very sure which constituents I'll be standing in. And I'm likely to pose some very stiff competition there, and may the best candidate win. So as introduced, my name is Mutuso Liwayo. I work for an organization called Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association. And I have been requested by the conveners of this very important meeting, basically to share my perspectives with you with regards to mining contracts. But I also know that most of you are actually experts in this subject matter. You sit in those committees, and some of you even participate in mining. You are miners in your own right, and here others have actually superintended over the ministries of mines and mining development as ministers. So I think the whole idea is all of us here basically to have that conversation, share experiences on how best we can ensure that we get value from the mineral resources that we have. And I think from the sample that was done here in terms of who comes from mining countries, I think largely everyone does have one form of mining or the other. This may vary in terms of the depth of the mining itself, and also the contribution of the mining sector to the economy. But at least everyone, to a large extent, comes from countries where mining plays a very important role in terms of contributing towards economic development. So I think that's the starting point. Mining is a big player, or a very important sector. I come from Zimbabwe, and over the past 20 years, one could argue that other sectors of the economy have not actually performed. And it is actually the mining sector that has hope in terms of reviving the economy and hopefully stabilize it, and hopefully in the end have a revival of the economy. So it is indeed very important. So in terms of the this thing, is it work? Okay. So in terms of the outline, as indicated by Mukupa, it's not actually a presentation, because it has to be very interactive, it has to be very conversational. But as someone who was asked, I thought I could come up with a framework that can start the conversation in terms of outlining the issues. And I intend to do this within the next 10 minutes or so. And then we can go into a detailed conversation where we begin to understand what challenges do you face when it comes to contract monitoring and performance, and what may need to be done to make sure that we improve the situation. So I will start by quickly providing an outline or overview of what is a mining contract. I think we are discussing contracts here, but what are they? And why are they important? Why are mining contracts important? To the extent that we had to put this as a conversation on the agenda. And as Mukupa has said, to a larger extent, we have those mineral resources, but what determines what we benefit as countries or as host communities is basically the contract itself. So mining contracts are very important to determine the kind of value that we'll be able to get from our resources. So to a larger extent, it's not the only important thing, but it's also one of those most important things that helps us in terms of getting value. Then, of course, I'll quickly run through the types of mining contracts that are there, and probably most important, what is required to have effective contract negotiation and implementation. And I'm sure Titus, when he was presenting, made reference to some of those key factors that needs to be taken into account. And of course, we'll look into the role that Parliament play or can play in terms of contract negotiations and their implementation based on their oversight role. And the most important part is basically the way forward, where we hope we'll be able to develop an action plan that can help members of parliament to do better when it comes to contract monitoring. Oh. Yes. So what is a mining contract? I provide a working definition there, which states a mining contract is an agreement concluded between an investor and a host government or a state-owned enterprises. In Zimbabwe, we have what is called the Zimbabwe Mining Development Corporation, which has entered into a number of investment agreements with those that are interested in terms of investing into the mining sector. And the main objective of a contract is basically to regulate a specific investment project. There are a number of projects that can actually be implemented, whether it is within the mining sector, the agricultural sector. So a contract itself is very particular in terms of what it is regulating. So it could be the mining of copper, as in Zambia. So we come up with a contract that regulates how we mine copper. In other countries, it is platinum group metals. We also have gold, diamonds, and all those other things. So to a larger extent, the agreement itself does define the kind of relationship that is going to prevail between the investor and also the host nation, or in this case, the state-owned enterprises. I think the main distinguishing factor of a contract is that it is legally binding, and it creates, defines, and governs mutual rights and obligations among parties. So it defines the rights of the investor, the obligations of the investor, but also the rights of the host nation or the state-owned enterprises that is representing the state and its obligations. And what is most important is that its breach actually results in sanction. Those whose rights would have been violated, whether it is the host nation or the investor itself, has access to remedy, where they can actually claim that our rights in terms of the contract itself have been violated and they seek redress. It could be within the national level in terms of the courts that are there. It could be at the international level where there are arbitration mechanisms. So the most important thing is understanding that it is something that is enforceable. So this is why it is important when we negotiate to make sure that we are very clear in terms of what we want. Because when there are problems, what people do is basically go back to that contract. So when you allege that our rights are violated as a country, people go back to that contract to really understand what rights are those, and also the obligations that the investor would have committed themselves to. So if they are not there, then it becomes a problem, because you'll be alleging things that are not reflected in the four corners of that agreement, which is why it is important as countries negotiate to make sure that they are very clear what they want, and that they have people that are able and effective in terms of negotiation to make sure that they capture those requirements and include them in the contract. But I think, as has been indicated, most of the time we negotiate poorly as Africans, and we end up not getting value from those mineral resources. And there's also a distinction between contracts and investment treaties. As I said, contracts are concluded between host nations and the investor. But when it comes to investment treaties, I think these are treaties that are signed between two countries. It could be those bilateral investment agreements. So I think that's the distinction factor, that contracts is between the investor and also the host nation. But when it comes to treaties, investment treaties, these are signed between two countries. So Zambia, for example, are signing a bilateral investment agreement with the Netherlands, for example. Yes, but why are mining contracts important? I mean, we could just enter into some agreements or whatever it is, but when you look at this conversation today, it's about illicit financial flows. So mining contracts are very important in fighting illicit financial flows. So more often than not, we hear countries, communities, civil society organizations complaining that we are losing out. But when that conversation happens, people have to go back to the contracts. Maybe that's something that is actually agreed or allowed under that contract. So at times, people cry, but without looking at the contracts itself, because we have negotiated poorly, and we allow these mining companies to take, as it takes holidays or whatever, forgo royalties for some time, and all of a sudden we cry. So to a large extent, it all depends on the contract itself, and even domestic resource mobilization. What does the contract that we sign? Which one? This one? Oh, there. Okay. I'm told that people are not able to see it. Oh, when I click, I have to point there. Oh, okay. I see. I was clicking here. That's why maybe I was struggling. Maybe that also explains why Titus was struggling. Okay, so I have to point there. Thank you. Okay. That's why. Okay. That's fine. Thanks for that. We talk about domestic resource mobilization. With all those crises that Titus has talked about, investment is very limited from outside. So to a large extent, we also have to maximize in terms of what we can generate domestically. I come from Zimbabwe, a country that has been under sanctions for the past 20 years. And the focus now is basically on domestic resource mobilization. And these contracts become very important in terms of domestic resource mobilization. So the way how you frame them can actually determine whether we are able to get those benefits, whether we are able to fight illicit financial flows effectively, and whether we are able to mobilize domestic resources effectively. Contracts are important because the presence of mineral resources, I think when you refer to the African mining vision, it argues that the presence of mineral resources signifies what we call a comparative advantage. So you have those resources, and I'm sure as honorable members of parliament, you grew up with the people that also had some ambitions to become members of parliament, but some of them did not make it, but you did. So the same applies to minerals. We have them, that's a comparative advantage. But the biggest question is, how do you turn that comparative advantage into competitive advantage? That's where contracts become critical, because to a larger extent, they are the ones that are going to determine whether that is feasible, or we just remain saying we have the potential to transform the Zambian economy, as Mukupa was saying, over the 100 years. But when you look into the contracts, probably this is where the problem really lies. It's not just contracts only, but contracts are a very important part of turning that comparative advantage into competitive advantage. So those that have been able to get value from their mineral resources, to a large extent, is based on well-negotiated contracts that are effective, that can actually be enforced. And if you are not careful, actually contracts can be used as a way of colonization. We have a classic example in Zimbabwe, where the then King Lobengula thought he was giving away mineral rights to the British South African company, but in the process, the country ended up being colonized. So again, it's actually contracts through the right concession. So this shows how important these contracts are. So in as much as it will not be giving the country to colonialists, but in terms of what we lose if we negotiate poorly, then I think it is as significant as being colonized in terms of the failure to develop economically, the failure to address challenges that faces us in terms of poverty reduction, in terms of achieving sustainable development goals. Again, I would want to quote verbatim from the Africa Mining Vision in terms of what it says regarding the importance of mining contracts. It states that overall, the key strategy in optimizing a resource endowment is around the resource regulatory regime, which directly determines the relative division of the spoils and indirectly influences the deepening of the sector through down and upward linkages to the local, national, and regional levels. That's the African Mining Vision. And among that regulatory framework, it includes contracts. So we can't run away from contracts because they are the ones that actually determine the spoils that we are going to get as a country. So negotiate well, then we can actually reap the benefits of the potential of our mineral resources. Negotiate poorly, we'll continue to wail and mourn and say that we have mineral resources. We are very rich, but very poor. And we have seen that in many countries. Even those countries that don't have mineral resources are doing better, much better than us, who have the resources. And that's why people talk about the resource curse. So the resource curse, to a large extent, one could argue that it's actually a contract curse that failure to negotiate. Of course, there are other important factors like leadership that are also critical. But even contract negotiation, effective contract negotiation is part of that good leadership. So if you can't negotiate properly, then the leadership is also questionable. But so it's really important that we get the contract right. Yes, I was told, yes. Contracts define the terms of investment projects and constitute a key instrument of governance. As I said, when people begin to cry and wail to say that we are not getting benefits, the question is, what does the contract itself say? And those investors, they normally push back to say, you are complaining that we have not done this and that. But let's go to the contract. What is it that we committed in terms of obligations? What is it that we committed in terms of the service that we are going to provide? And more often than not, we find ourselves stranded because this has not been captured. Some of these things is basically on that understanding that this should be part of corporate social responsibility. It should not be like that. If you want something delivered, include it in the contract because the contract is enforceable, it's binding. And when those that made those promises fail to perform, you have recourse in terms of going to the courts. But if it is based on corporate social responsibility, as we have seen in most countries, then it becomes problematic in terms of enforcing. So that's something that is basically important. It also determines the risks, costs, and benefits. So when you look at investments, it's about risks, it's about benefits, and costs that are associated with that. So what are the costs to the host nation? What are the costs to the investor? And what are the risks? And what are the benefits? So this is where this should actually be defined, captured, to make sure that they become binding. So it is important that we negotiate contracts with that in mind. If we want something to be done by the investor, let it be reflected in the contract. If we want him to build schools in the community where he or she is mining, let that be reflected in that contract rather than leaving it to some side negotiations because that will create problems for us. They also shape the extent to which the investment provides public revenues. I think we talk about taxes, income generating opportunities through employment and linkages with the local economy. So when people cry that the Chinese are not investing, are not taking local labor and all those other things, the question is, what does the contract say? Did it say that they have to hire from the local communities? Or it didn't. So again, we end up having challenges. But at the end of the day, the investors will simply go back to the contract itself to say, we did not commit that we are going to be hiring local labor. So why should this become a problem for us? Then we find ourselves with an egg in our face as Africans. But let's be specific in those contracts, what we want. So it's basically what you want. Capture it in that contract, then you are able to negotiate effectively. It also shapes the balance between the economic considerations and pillars of sustainable development, social and environmental issues. More often than not, we talk about investors polluting water and all those other things, not rehabilitating the environment after they've mined. But again, you go to the contract, maybe they're not even required to rehabilitate. It says once they've finished mining, then they can rehabilitate. But maybe by the time that they finish mining, they are bankrupt already. So how are they going to rehabilitate? You go to South Africa today, there's a serious problem there with acid mine drainage. But those companies have already gone. They're no longer there, and the burden now lies on the state in terms of addressing those problems. But had that been part and part of the contract, then probably the South African government would have had recourse without any problems. And that happens in every country, even in Zimbabwe as well. So I think it's very clear and very important that whatever we want to be done, let it be captured in the contract itself, rather than saying that we'll discuss this or we have a gentleman's agreement. A gentleman's agreement will not be enforceable because people will simply argue that this is not part and parcel of the terms of reference or the contract. Indeed, even the involuntary displacement that we talk about, the lack of compensation, the failure to consult communities. Again, you go to the contract, there's nowhere it requires them to be consulted. So that's why they end up being evicted. But if it is included there and then they are required to consult them, effectively provide information, and when rights are violated, access to remedy, then that will help us in terms of making sure that these investment contracts work for us. So that's the whole idea. Investment should work in our favor rather than the opposite. But at the moment, to a large extent, people can argue that investment contracts or mining contracts are basically not working in our favor, but they are working in the interest of the investor to the disadvantages of host communities and the host government themselves. If these contracts are well designed and implemented, they can actually maximize the contribution of natural resources to sustainable development goals, to domestic resource mobilization, to the fight against illicit financial flows. But on the other hand, if they are poorly negotiated, they impose unfavorable terms on the host country for a very long period of time. And this results in serious conflicts that we have seen between the communities and the investors, and in some cases between communities and the host government, and to some extent citizens as well, because citizens will be arguing that we are not seeing the benefits that are coming from the exploitation of these resources. All we see is that mining is taking place, but where are the benefits? And that's why people end up questioning the benefits of mining, but actually saying that it imposes costs on us. And that's why there's this movement that is there, where other people are even saying that no to mining. But it's because they're failing to see the benefits. They're failing to see the benefits because we have negotiated poorly as host governments. But if we negotiate well, then we'll be able to see the benefits. The communities are happy, the citizens are happy, the host nations are happy, and also the investors. But at the moment, to a large extent, it is only the investor that is happy, and that is problematic. That's something that we need to rectify. As I have said, there are a number of ways of addressing that, but contract negotiation is one of those tools in the toolbox that is critical in terms of making sure that we get those benefits. One of my favorite politicians has actually hinted that in terms of comparing what Africans does when they are negotiating contracts, he simply put it as follows. He said that when we are negotiating as Africans, we are blind, we are dumb and deaf. So if you look at that combination, when you are blind, when you are deaf and dumb, and you are trying to negotiate, it poses some serious problems. That's why maybe today we are always talking about the resource case. It all emanates from our failure to negotiate effectively, and to a large extent, it's linked to those challenges. And that's what we need to really improve on. And these are the types of mining contracts. I'm sure you're all familiar with them, so I won't waste time because I'm told that I'm running out of time. So these are some of the prospecting agreements, exploration agreements, joint venture agreements. So all these are types of mining contracts that are there. So what is required for us to negotiate effectively? Knowing the resource quality and quantity. This is critical. I think this is where the dumbness and the blindness actually comes. So when you negotiate with investors, are we clear about the resource quality and quantity? More often than not, this is better known by the investor who comes and says that I'm going to be mining here for the next 5 years. So based on that, this is what I'll be able to afford. But maybe after 20 years, they're still there mining. So it becomes very important to invest in geological information, and this is one of the call to arms by the African Mining Vision. Let's invest in geological information to know the quantity and also the quality. Then after that, we can now use that as a leverage to negotiate effectively with the investors. But at the moment, it's mainly the investors that know this information, and they use that as leverage against us. Then there's also a need for strength and balanced negotiation capacity. It's not just about being a minister. And even if you are a minister, you may not be very competent in terms of negotiating natural resource contracts. These are very complex contracts that have vexed many people, even learned people, even professors. So that's why there is need to have that competent team that is balanced. So how can you negotiate the impacts of mining on the environment, on communities, without seeking their input? We have people that are competent, whether it is within government and other ministries. And at one point, I really laughed in Zimbabwe when the Minister of Mines was basically saying that an agreement or a contract that was negotiated by the Minister of Trade and Industry that he was not even aware in terms of the provisions. So here is a Minister of Trade and Industry negotiating a mining contract for the Minister of Mines, but the Minister of Mines is not aware in terms of the provisions. We thought that it was only society organizations that were being marginalized, but even ministers among themselves marginalized each other. then I think that's where issues to do with corruption come in. Because if indeed there's nothing to hide, why not bring in all those that are competent, the relevant ministries, and also other stakeholders that may be critical? There's also need for these contracts that are negotiated to be monitored by a number of stakeholders, including Parliament, the media, and civil society. This helps because it guards against poor negotiations, because people know that if they negotiate poorly, they will be exposed and people will be able to ask a lot of questions. So even those that want to be corrupt know that when this information comes into the public domain, people will be able to ask questions. But if there is a lot of secrecy there, opaqueness, then it becomes difficult to hold those people accountable, and they negotiate with impunity, knowing that nothing is going to happen, no one is going to be raising these questions. Then, of course, the ability to monitor and sanction. I think based on the oversight role as legislators, there is need for consequences for those that have failed to abide by those contractual provisions. But if people get away with it without being sanctioned, then there's no incentive for people to negotiate well. Okay, I'm winding up. So, what could be the role that parliamentarians play? So in those countries where legislators have the power to ratify these mining contracts, it is important that you really scrutinize these agreements before they are passed into law or before they are approved. So if it is brought before Parliament for you to look into it as legislators, do you really take time to scrutinize these contracts, or they just get passed without you really playing a critical role? You have an oversight role, I think, among your roles and responsibilities. So it's really important that even if you don't have the expertise, I think, as we said, there are other people that could be out there that can actually help you in terms of understanding the import of these contracts and make sure that you really discuss them effectively and understand the provisions. So that's really important. Then, once these have been finalized, implementation also becomes critical. And in terms of your oversight role, you are required to make sure that you really monitor the implementation of these contracts. I know more often than not, parliamentarians go out on tours or on fact-finding missions to really understand how these contracts are being implemented and how they are performing. That's the opportunity to make sure that you hold those that are not doing it properly accountable. Then, of course, there's also need to advocate for laws that will actually improve contract negotiations. So you know these challenges that are out there. So as legislators, among your roles is the legislative role. Why don't you come up with laws and policies that ensure that there is better negotiation of contracts? I look at the Zimbabwean constitution, it does provide for that in terms of section 315. But up to now, we have not seen any law that has actually been enacted. So as parliamentarians, when you have understood that there are shortcomings in the way that contracts are being negotiated, it becomes your responsibilities to come with laws that actually rectify that problem. So would you expect members of parliament to do that? And also, once these have been negotiated, how do your constituents get to know about these contracts as part of your representative role? They should be aware, because this mining actually takes place in those constituencies, in your constituencies, and affecting communities. And communities can also play a very important role in terms of holding the investors accountable. But they can only do that if they've got access to information, though that becomes very critical in terms of sharing the information. Then, of course, it is also important for capacity building, legislators for themselves to really understand these issues, and that's why we are having this conversation. And it may require people that have the knowledge to come and train parliamentarians so that they're able to understand contract negotiation and their impacts and the importance. Then they'll be able to use those skills. But not only that, in as much as countries may face those challenges in terms of having competent and balanced negotiators, but there are organizations that are out there that are supportive of this capacity building. I know the African Development Bank does have this African Legal Support Facility, which can help countries negotiate better. But how many countries have actually approached the African Development Bank for support? None. And you begin to wonder why. Don't you want to get the best deal? These are services that are available for free. And all you need is basically approach them and ask, and the support shall be provided. But we don't see that happening. Maybe for other reasons where people want to continue to negotiate ineffectively and benefit in the process. But those are resources that are available that can actually be utilized. You may think that probably civil society organizations will cause problems for us, but what about this facility that is there? I think most of our African countries are members of the African Development Bank. It's actually meant for our own benefit. So this is an opportunity that should actually be utilized to make sure that we are able to negotiate effectively. So with that sort of framework, we'll now move on to the next stage where we are actually going to be developing an action plan or the way forward in terms of how best we can make sure that we're able to negotiate better, and also what may need to be done when we go back to our countries to make sure that we're able to monitor effectively. So I'll end there and move on to the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we move on to the next stage, I think for us as members of Parliament, what we need to appreciate is our responsibility. Just as a way of highlighting, by way of example, I'll speak about Zambia. In Zambia, what are the things we have been concerned about? We have had incentive agreements with the mining companies, which we call development agreements, 25 to 30 years tax-free. That's the lifetime of some of us. Is that in order? We look at the damage done to our roads by copper trucks. The copper mining industry damages the roads, but the people of Zambia, are the ones who pay for the road repairs. Is that in order? We look at the issue of pricing of copper and other minerals. There was something they call transfer pricing, where a mining company in Zambia sells to its own company in Switzerland at $2,000 a ton. Then that company in Switzerland sells to China at the correct price of $10,000 a ton. So the sales for Zambia is very, very low. Is this in order? We look at the issues of recapitalizing our economy. As you are aware, Zambia has just borrowed $1.3 billion from the IMF. We export $1.2 billion every month in copper. Why are we borrowing when in our backyard we are producing that wealth? Is this in order? We look at the challenge of accountability. Technically, you are able to monitor what is coming out of the ground at the mine site. Then after that, it goes to a weigh bridge, which weighs the weight of the truck, where it's another checkpoint. And then you have the export through the borders, customs, a third checkpoint. Are these three speaking the same language and giving us the correct figures? You look at the issue of our responsibility as a nation to protecting the world from drug trafficking, from money laundering, from financing wars in other countries. We have a responsibility to know what happens to the money that is earned from the mining industry. And for many progressive countries, when you export minerals, the resources come back into your economy, and from your banks, they move to the relevant expense centers with documentation. If the money is going and sitting in Switzerland, you never know where that money is going. Maybe it's going into drug trafficking. Maybe it's going into money laundering. We have no idea. So as members of Parliament, these are the challenges that we have to look at as we discuss this. Our own experience in 3 months in Zambia, this was I think it was around 2006, 2007, no, maybe a little, 2010, 2011. We had a statutory instrument that was pushing for the mining industry to show exactly how money is going out of the country. And some of these mining companies showed our central bank a loan from abroad with an interest rate of 48% on the dollar. That can't be. It can't be correct. There's something wrong. Some of these mining companies had 10 employees, management contract to CEO, CFO, and so forth, who we know earn good salaries, maybe $50,000 a month. But 10 times 50 is 500,000 a month. They would sign a contract, management contract, not employees, but management contract, $10 million a month. So 9.5 million is money going out of the country. Now this we have allowed to happen in our countries. And as members of parliament, these are the things that we need to tackle as we discuss this thing. So I'll ask my sister to come here, and this is an opportunity for us to share what is happening in our countries, share what our concerns are, and maybe our consultant here can give you some answers, but really this is about empowering each other with information. My sister.
Thank you so much, Mutuso and Mr. Dodia. So now we want to do more listening. I think we've spoken a lot. Just to get comments and feedback from the parliamentarians in the room. You've had your own experiences, and so we want to hear from you. The idea also of this platform is the exchange of information. What are some of the good practices, some of the things that haven't worked, but also how do we support each other as parliamentarians on the continent, because this fight is actually more continental than national, especially when you think of issues around transfer pricing, tax avoidance, and other related issues. So I'll open the floor here. I don't know if we have a roving mic. Okay, very good. So I'm going to start on this side and end with our chair. So we have our honorable member over here, and then we'll just progress like that. So thank you. Just introduce yourself and the country, and maybe speak a little to the mining dynamic, perhaps what you mine in your country, if you are not aware of that. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. On m'appelle Honorable Maombi Katsongo Sosten. Je suis député national de la RDC, élu du territoire de Lubero au Nord Kivu. Je remercie les présentateurs par rapport à son allocution et voudrais ici peut-être relever mon inquiétude d'abord dans le cadre général en tant que membre de Apnifft. Je crois notre structure Apnifft, à l'issue de rencontres comme celle-ci, il y a lieu qu'on soit ou qu'on sorte avec des stratégies ou des options pratiques. Parce qu'au finish, il faut effectivement que Apnifft prouve ou montre sa contribution dans le relèvement de la situation. Et en suivant l'exposé, j'ai compris peut-être que il a été abordé dans un angle, mais la situation qu'il y a par exemple à l'est de la RDC semble un peu particulière. En ce sens, c'est que, contrairement à ce qui peut être l'exploitation en Zambie ou ailleurs, en tout cas en RDC, surtout la partie est, les ressources naturelles sont à la fois une opportunité de développement, mais aussi une source d'insécurité. Et dans ces cas, vous allez constater, si on peut parler de l'exploitation, les contrats, on peut peser, on peut voir les minerais qui ont été extraits. Dans la partie est de la RDC, c'est peut-être le contraire. Parce que la politique qui est mise sur place là-bas, c'est une politique telle que on voudrait créer une situation de non-État pour que, effectivement, les gouvernements ne puissent pas être à mesure de voir au clair ce qui se passe. Et à ce niveau, il y a des acteurs directs. C'est là que vous entendez, on parle des groupes armés qui pilulent la partie Est. Et ces groupes armés, quand vous essayez d'évaluer leur puissance, en tout cas, vous ne direz pas que ce sont ces groupes armés qui sont à l'œuvre. Il y a certainement...
Sorry, honorable member, just one more minute because we have a lot of comments. So please, if you could conclude your submission.
Merci beaucoup. C'est parce que vous avez dit qu'on peut expliquer un peu. On peut expliquer un peu. Voilà pourquoi je suis parti par là. Donc, merci beaucoup. Donc, je coupe cet aspect. Alors, ma question par rapport au présentateur, c'était effectivement de vouloir comprendre si, à travers l'Afrique, la situation des négociations des contrats miniers se présente de la même manière. Est-ce que dans tous les pays, les contrats à négocier passent par le Parlement? Vous avez mené une enquête comme ça? Si oui, nous, sinon par contre, si non, nous comme Apnifft, qu'est-ce que nous pouvons avoir comme option ou comme stratégie pour amener à corriger les choses? Deuxième préoccupation, est-ce que vous avez déjà évalué dans la globalité les manques à gagner que l'Afrique totalise dans son ensemble par rapport aux multinationales qui sont en train d'exploiter nos minéraux et dont dans la plupart des pays africains, on ne voit pas les retombées. C'est presque vraiment partout, surtout en milieu où on exploite, qu'il y a la souffrance de la population. Et s'il y a déjà cette évaluation des manques à gagner, nous, comme Apnifft, nous prenons quelle option pour couper court à cette situation? Voilà un peu mes deux petites préoccupations.
Thank you, honorable member. Sorry to cut you short. I think it's just to accommodate everyone. We'll have another opportunity and space to unpack the issues more. But thank you so much for sharing the DRC experience and for your question. I think Mutuso has taken note of the question, and there'll be a moment when he can give a response. Yes, honorable member, please proceed. If I could please ask that you just take a maximum of 2 minutes each for your intervention, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, madame. Moi, c'est M. Paul Odiane, député de la RDC. Je voudrais donner une petite contribution à ce qui concerne notre pays, la République démocratique du Congo. Vous devez retenir qu'en matière de contrats miniers, nous avons deux sortes de contrats miniers. Il y a les contrats miniers qui passent par les structures officielles et il y a les contrats miniers également qui sont négociés par certains conseillers qui sont éparpillés dans les différents cabinets, soit du président de la République ou soit des ministres. Et ces contrats qui passent par une voie non officielle, ce sont des contrats qui sont négociés avec, par exemple, les Chinois et qui pullulent dans notre pays. Les Chinois, vous savez, il y a des Congolais, par exemple, qui travaillent avec des Chinois comme étant de sociétés qui font l'exploitation semi-industrielle. Et ce genre d'exploitation, nous nous appauvrissent davantage. Parce que personne ne maîtrise comment ça se passe. Il y a pollution de l'environnement, il y a pollution des eaux, il y a la destruction de la faune et de flore, et ainsi de suite, mais sans que personne ne maîtrise comment les choses se passent. Et deuxièmement, il y a l'exploitation irrégulière qui se fait par l'intermédiaire des groupes armés qu'on peut appeler communément M23, soutenus par le Rwanda. Et cette exploitation, c'est comme nous le disions dès le départ ici, que l'Afrique a besoin des leaders éclairés, des leaders capables de booster donc le développement de notre continent. Mais malheureusement, nous avons un sérieux problème de leadership. Nous avons des dirigeants qui ne sont pas à même de comprendre que l'Afrique doit quitter l'état où elle se trouve pour aller de l'avant, parce qu'ils sont téléguidés par les puissances étrangères. Et pour terminer, tout ce que nous avons dit ici réside dans notre capacité, nous Africains, de nous donner pour notre continent. Il faut que l'éducation commence au niveau de nos familles respectives. Donc, chaque parent doit inculquer dans la tête de ses enfants que l'Afrique ne peut se développer que si nous-mêmes, Africains, nous prenons conscience. L'Occident ne peut nullement nous aider à ce que nous puissions nous développer. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Honorable Member. So we'll move to this row and then move this side. Yeah, so just a minute, please. Then maybe I'll ask Mtuso to prepare to respond to the 3 comments, and then we'll move to that row and then come to the end.
Thank you very much, Presenter. I'm Honorable Dr. Alex Katakwe, Member of Parliament for Solwezi East constituency in northwestern province of Zambia. Looking at the presentation, you talked about having geological information. If you look at Zambia, the geological information that we have in the mining sector is that which was done many years back by Britain. And that is information that is held by the privileged few. And currently, as Zambian government, we do not seem to have our own first-hand information regarding geological survey. And we notice a lot of mining companies, they just come 5 years down the line, they're just mining, and they claim that they're still in the exploration stage. But you see materials going out of the country, they keep claiming, no, we are still exploring. We have examples in my district where we have emeralds. Up to now, they're still in the exploration stage, but millions and millions of dollars are being realized every day. So how would we, as African nations or governments, realize or come up with this geological information without the influence of the elite, the cartel, so to speak? Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, sir. So I'll allow Mtuso to just make a comment on what has been said, but I think he's reminded me that we have these questions. So if our reflections and interventions can be centered around these questions, then we can have some kind of an action plan that then leads us forward. So maybe if I can go through the questions very quickly. The first is, what challenges do members of parliament face in understanding the role and importance of mining contracts? The second is, what challenges do members of parliament face in contract monitoring? Are you tracking and tracing what's being done on the contracts that have been signed by yourselves and the previous governments? Number 3 is, what can be done to improve members of parliament's understanding of mining contracts and their importance in investment projects? And then lastly, what can be done to ensure that members of parliament become more effective in contract monitoring? Because you can sign a contract, but are we then following what those provisions, whether those provisions are being implemented accordingly? So thanks, Mutuso. He's drawn us back to this. I think this will guide us better in the way we intervene and in the comments that we make, so that we are not stating the obvious in terms of the problems that we are facing, but rather even presenting them with solutions. So just thought I would bring us back to this. Thank you. So what I'll do is I'll allow for Mutuso to speak and respond in a minute, and then we can proceed to the next speaker using these questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Mkupa. Yeah, I think I was told it has to be interactive, so I see members are asking me questions. It's me who should actually be asking those questions to hear your concerns and your answers. So thanks for bringing us back to that. But responding to the question that were posed by the members of parliament, there was this question from the honorable member from DRC to say, is the way how contracts are negotiated similar in all the countries? I think the short response to that is that it's not similar. I think there are other countries where parliament plays a very important role. There are also other countries where it is basically just the executive only that negotiates this, and parliament does not have any role in terms of the negotiations apart from the oversight role. So it all depends. And that's why I indicated in that presentation to say, in those countries where there are opportunities for these contracts before they are signed to be tabled before parliament for consideration, parliament should actually play their role, their true role, rather than rubber stamping whatever is there without really understanding what are the provisions, what are the implications of those provisions in terms of the issues that we have been discussing, whether it is sustainable development, poverty reduction, environmental issues, employment opportunity creation, and all those others. So they really need to scrutinize those and then make their input. We know in some other countries where members of parliament, where they're not very sure in terms of the provisions, they have actually approached society organizations from interpretation of those contracts, and this has helped them to play a more effective role in terms of their implementation and also pushing back on the executive where they felt that the provisions are not promoting the interests of the country. The other question was, has there been an assessment on how much Africa is losing? I think when we started this morning, there were some figures that were quoted in terms of how much Africa is losing as a result of illicit financial flows. And I think the Mbeki panel on illicit financial flows, high-level illicit financial flows, actually also outlined how much we are losing as Africans as a result of illicit financial flows. So there is literature that is out there that actually demonstrates that what we get as aid is less compared to what we lose on a daily basis. And the mining sector is regarded as the highest in terms of promoting this illicit financial flow. So I can assure you that we lose more as Africans based on those studies that have actually been done in terms of what we lose out going out as a result of illicit financial flows compared to what we get through aid that is given to us by our development partners. So that's why Tax Justice Network Africa is making this actually a theme and also constituting this forum for parliamentarians on illicit financial flows is because of that understanding that it is retarding development and growth on the African continent and that we lose out more compared to what we gain. Then the information. Indeed, the Honorable Member of Parliament has disappeared. Is he still there? Doctor. Yeah, so one would pose a question, why are we not investing? I mean, it says we are using information from the colonial era, and it's not just Zambia only. I mean, I can cite my own country, Zimbabwe. We also have similar problems. And one would say maybe DRC and everyone. So the question is, why are we not investing? I think those are some of the questions that I would want to hear from the members of parliament. Why are our governments not investing to understand that information? Then you realize that your resource value is worth 200 billion. Then you can now use that to negotiate effectively. So at the moment, we don't have that information. As I said, we actually rely on the investor to tell us what we have. And that is problematic. So when you look at those, the Dubais that you talk about, they did not operate it like that. It's basically understanding the resource value itself, then use that now to negotiate better contracts so that they're also able to benefit better. So I think that's the mindset that we need to really change, to say it may take us 2 billion to get that, But out of that, maybe we end up getting 100 billion. So you do the cost-based benefit analysis there, you understand that we stand to benefit more from investing in geological information.
Thank you so much, Mutuso. I think very, very, very pertinent points you brought up. So I'll come to the Honorable. We'll go in this row. Please, may I ask just 1 minute, and then thinking through those questions.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate the presentation. But one thing that I just wanted, it surprises me because Uganda had a copper industry. One of the actually the largest mining was the Kilembe mines, and our copper mines collapsed in the 1980s because they indicated there was no market for copper. But Zambia has survived all through. So I keep wondering why. Although there are efforts now to revive it, I hope that can be revived. But you are speaking to members of parliament. And as members of parliament, we have 3 arms of government. Ours is legislation and oversight. And therefore, I don't know what happens in other countries, but in my country, now to bring us into reviewing contracts before they are actually signed, that is a function of the executive. And if we get into that, then we shall also be held responsible tomorrow when bad contracts are signed. So I have been, wondering whether that is really what we should be taking. I think what we should be doing, leave the executive do their work, but ask for transparency, because all these contracts signed are not shared by us, are not shared with us as members of parliament. And this is now something that we need to take up, so that whatever contracts are signed of this huge nature should actually be deposited in parliament so that the relevant committees can then scrutinize, but also it makes oversight functions easier. I think that should be our call now, to ensure that there is more transparency. And in the mining sector, which, by the way, I've been a minister in the minerals sector, but there was lack of transparency. We had to even ensure that now we come up with a new legislation, because government left the mining area to the private sector. And considering the surveys that have been done, we actually discovered that the country is mineral rich, with even minerals that we did not expect in certain areas. And this takes me to the earlier conversation in the morning of the climate and conflicts. The conflicts now are in areas where we have discovered a lot of gold, the Karamoja region. There is complete instability in that area. And we are asking ourselves why. But we all know that it's because of the various gold mines that have been discovered. And therefore, those who want to benefit are now trying to keep people in conflict, drive them out of their areas, and take over. So what I just wanted to state, of course, with the new law in place, which we are waiting for the president to assent to, we hope that the state can now get involved in commercial mining, pick more interest. Of course, there will be a national mining company established, but the point here that I wanted to make is that as legislators, let us demand for transparency and not get involved into these contracts scrutinizing before they are signed, because that is not our role. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Honorable. I think a solution, contract transparency, that parliamentarians should demand for contract transparency going forward. Yes, Honorable Member.
Thank you. My name is Dennis. I come from Uganda. This presentation presupposes that the situation in different countries is normal and stable, and contracts can be executed. But in many mineral-rich countries in Africa, as he has partly observed, there is no normal environment. an example is just what the colleagues in DRC alluded. So I wanted to know how you expect such countries to benefit from their mineral resources without a stable political environment. Two, it is often said if you are poor, your ability to negotiate is so much diminished. I've seen situations where poor countries are forced to go into signing these contracts just because they want to make money. And in the light of competition for investments, they are bound to sacrifice their resources because they want to quickly get this money. I'm wondering how people stuck in such environments, if you could just share some experiences, how people in such situations have been able to get the best deal, or how should they move. I wanted also to understand, because you indicated our role will be to monitor the performance of these contracts and even to review them where they are not serving the interest of the country. How easy is it to achieve these, reforms, amendments to the contracts? What are some of the paths other people have taken? For example, if I'm going to realize the contracts we have signed in Uganda, an example would just be the East African oil and gas pipeline. Many of us think that was a raw deal because it gave too much for the companies and little for the country. There have been tax exemptions provided for the company. There are so many benefits that really eat into what these resources could do for the country. The company is domiciled in a country where Uganda has double tax agreements, and so that tells us there will be base erosion. They will do little in our country while channeling or shifting the profits out. So what are the routes? How easy is it to review those things? How can a member be able to achieve those reforms?
Okay.
Lastly,
Sorry, Honorable Member.
Maybe
In 30
are
seconds,
are there some tools that help people monitor? For example, someone alluded here that different institutions needed to speak together. You'll find in some countries what the revenue authority reveals is different from what the mining people will reveal. So you don't know how much is going out. Are there tools available to understand what the exports are, who is buying this thing? Are there tools, open source tools that members of parliament can use to probably do such monitorings? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. May I please ask that we keep our submission short? We have 5 minutes, so I think it would be good to allow everyone to say something. So please. Thank you.
Thank you. Time, I think, is not on our side. I'm Alex Major from Malawi, but I'll just be very quick. Listening to the presentation, I think there's a lot of issues that we would have discussed in real terms, but because time is not permitting, I'll just ask some questions to the presenter. I'm sure when he was coming up with the presentation, he had some research and other issues. Looking at this presentation, we can sit and say a contract is something that is the main duty of a contract is to regulate some issues that both parties in the contract will be following. What is the legal framework in Africa that is preventing us from realizing what is required from these minerals? That's my question. What is it that we need to put in place in terms of legal framework that will protect us Africans? That's my first question to the presenter. Secondly, these contracts are enforceable. And later on in the presentation, you have said that there is the, what should I call it, information gaps in terms of, you've said you need capacity building. Who are these who are needed to be given that information so that when they're negotiating contracts, they are negotiating at a point of knowledge? We also need to understand, as members of parliament, at what point are we engaged in these negotiations? In most of the countries in Africa, we as members of parliament, our role is oversight. And oversight comes in after implementation. What is it that here we are sitting, and what is it we are putting in place in order for us to be engaged at an early stage as representatives of the people? That's one aspect that I would want maybe the presenter, and what is it that we're putting in place? Okay, I think time is running out.
Thank you so much. Thank you. 30 seconds, please, so that we can go around.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I'm Godfred Jesau from Ghana. I want to find out what spaces do we still have in this sector, because in my country we have gold, we have bauxite, diamond, oil, and all are going through the picture that is cutting across most African countries. The contracts have been signed, is skewed against the people and the country, Ghana, and of course, just like we find in many places. But I did hear Burundi, for example, say they cancelled some contracts. And does your work cover any information that we can share with countries here in gathered to see whether we can all have some example, good example of a pathway that members of parliament and also civil society organizations that are here in present can take up to start some advocacy on renegotiating some of these contracts, and what will be the line of negotiation that we will be looking for? Because for what we have, that is a raw deal. We realize that new issues of environmental destructions are now coming face to face with the communities. You literally do not have farm areas in most communities that these operations are going on. And so, you know, no food for the people, and yet they are mineral rich. So is there any example of a pathway that we can? As for the contracts, and we paying attention to the details of the contracts, I do agree. However, we are constrained because some of these things are being shrouded in secrecy, and so we can only ask for transparency, but we can't really do much. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to move to the other row, just for representation purposes. I'm sorry, to the first row, because we haven't picked anyone in that row. So please allow me, honorable members, to select a few members in that row.
Thank you very much. I think I will try, my intervention will try to respond to some of the questions that were raised. In the case of Tanzania, for example, and I would invite the presenter to look at these two laws and see if it provides a model law for Africa to intervene. In 2017, our late President Magufuli pioneered two laws to be enacted by Parliament: the Natural Wealth and Resources Contract, in bracket, Review and Renegotiation of Unconscionable Terms Act 2017. And then the other law is Natural Wealth and Resources, in bracket, Permanent Sovereignty Act of 2017. And the idea of these two laws, because like you said, these contracts are technical, sometimes were negotiated based on bilateral agreement, and it complicates even issues for parliaments to intervene. And some of our laws, like the mining, even the constitutions, do not give parliamentarians the power to intervene on these negotiations. So the late Magufuli thought he had so many questions. He wanted to intervene, so he was advised. And there's a particular section I want to read. It says, all arrangements on natural resources and made by government shall, within 6 sitting days of National Assembly, or be reported to Parliament. So, and the idea of these 2 laws was to try actually, even says, government of Tanzania will not be sued in any foreign court if, for example, there is a move by government to exercise its power of sovereignty to intervene on these contracts. So, because some of these agreements had those clauses exclusively giving foreign jurisdiction courts the right to intervene, for state not to intervene on these negotiations. So maybe because these are new laws and it's probably a new direction, maybe experts like you could tell us whether the direction by Tanzania is the right one. Because even when Parliament passed these laws, there were already arbitral proceedings challenging, you know, the legality of these laws. So maybe that would be a direction that we can take. Because as you presented in your presentation, how, like you said, for those countries whose legislators have power, so it's a question of law, really. If it is not expressly put in the constitution or the law, members of parliament cannot intervene. I thank you.
Thank you for that. Mutuso has asked that he responds, and then we can get the last set from this side of the room. So please allow him to respond, and then we'll come to this side of the room. Thank you. No, sorry, sir. Let him just respond, the facilitator, and then you can go for it. Thank you.
Hello? Yes, it does, yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Mkupa, and thank you very much for those questions, honorable members of parliament. It shows that this is something that is really topical and that concerns our economies and also the work that we do as legislators. So maybe let me start from the last question. So thanks very much, honorable, for highlighting those laws that are there. That, I mean, it's parliament that makes laws. So if there are bad laws that are there that are tying your hands, one of your roles is legislative and making laws. So if there are poor laws, honorable, I wanted to speak to the honorable from Zambia there. Why don't we come up with new laws that undo those bad laws that are there that results in poor contract negotiations? So just like what they highlighted, the honorable from Tanzania, I think we all celebrated the society organizations when that was passed. But of course, investors were not happy with that because it does affect them. But I think for us, it makes a lot of sense to say, look, we are a sovereign country, so if there are bad laws, should we continue with those simply because there are laws that are there? Then one will also now begin to question the role of parliament because its role is to legislate, come up with new laws that undo those problems that are there. But of course, we know some investors were not happy and also ended up threatening Tanzania that will withdraw the investment that are there. So that's another challenge that we face. But having good laws is one thing, but also now the implementation, and that's why we talk about the. So you may have those very good contracts that are there, but I think that's where the parliament plays a role in terms of monitoring the implementation of those contracts. I'm now speaking to the honorable from Uganda there who said, so what can we do? So the contracts have been signed, they could be good contracts, but in terms of their implementation, so if they say they are going to rehabilitate a road, in terms of your work, when you do those visits, you can see whether the road is there or not. They say they are going to construct a dam or whatever it is. So in terms of contract performance monitoring, that's what you now be looking at to say, those agreements, what was provided there, is it being implemented? So I think you could still play a very important role in that. Then I agree with the honorable from Ghana that indeed there are those other challenges. So I'll not say that the contract itself is a silver bullet that it will erase all the problems that are there. I think Titus in the morning spoke about the need for leadership. Yeah, the politics that we talk about. And that ability to negotiate. Indeed, these guys, the investors, play divide and rule. I mean, you are looking at a small country like Zimbabwe or even Lesotho negotiating with China. I mean, the dynamics there that are there here is a country of 1.2 billion people negotiating with maybe 5 million people. So the power dynamics become very much unbalanced. And I think that's why we go back to the likes of Nkrumah, the likes of Nyerere, their vision that they had there, that a United States of Africa that can also stand on its own and challenge, and simply says, this is the price that we are offering for copper, for example. So if you don't like it, go to hell. But today we can't do that because they'll go to DRC if Zambia refuses. And they'll go to Zimbabwe if Zambia refuses with its gold and all that. So there are also those other challenges that are there that may need to be really addressed. So I'm not simply saying that contract negotiation will solve all our problems, better contract negotiation, but it's a tool, as I said, that is in the toolbox that can build into some of those problems that we are facing. Then, of course, the politics has to play its role. You may even have that, but if there's corruption, then corruption also has to be dealt with. So I think it's something that we all need to look into holistically. Then in terms of contracts, yes, they've already been negotiated, Honorable, I agree. But if we limit it to simply say, because that is what is there, then it becomes a problem because we may be transparent over $1 for the next 100 years. That will not make any difference. But if you are transparent over 100 million, then that makes a difference. So indeed, contract, but once we learn that there's this bad contract that was negotiated, what do we do in future when other contracts are being negotiated? Do we simply say, because as legislators, our roles does not, but how can we influence? It could be reforms that may now begin to push you to say, no. We realize that you as the executive, you are negotiating poorly, but how can you also begin to have an opportunity to influence in terms of the negotiations? And I've indicated that it all depends on jurisdiction. In other countries, they allow parliament to play some sort of role. In others, they don't. But I think for me, it now goes back to say, what kind of reforms we can do to make sure that we don't continue to have those problems? Because the executive always hide behind that it's not your role. So do we simply fold our hands to say, look, it's not our role in terms, so let those contracts, bad contracts continue. So I think the whole idea, you look at laws, one of the things that is there is to reform laws. If there are bad laws, then they have to be reformed. And I'm sure Parliament can play a role there.
Thank you, Mtu. So how many more responses? Maybe one more minute?
One more minute.
As we have a few who would like to give some thoughts as well. Maybe we come back to that as you...
Okay, it's fine.
Okay.
You can
So I've seen you,
Can
but
I
please
just
allow me to...
a follow-up question?
Which you respond after these have given their...
Maybe that would settle the questions they have been answered. I wanted to understand what happens where those reviews and negotiations breach the terms of the contract that have already been signed. Because we had a case in Uganda recently, we passed the local content law, and we had to exclude the oil contracts from the law because the executive told us if you are going to tamper with those contracts, there will be breaches and the country is going to pay. Therefore, we cannot review what was already signed. So how does one move in such a situation?
Yeah, maybe in that case, I think he talked about contract renegotiation. The Tanzanian laws, they are very clear that it may even require renegotiation, but maybe in this case, but you have learned a lesson there. So that should help when you negotiate future contracts to say, look, how do we make sure that we don't end up being trapped like that again, to say where the executive will come and say, well, you can't because we have already finalized. And that's why it is important where legislation allows to allow other stakeholders, even Parliament, to make that impact, because we have learned that this results in problems. So how do you ensure that you are able to improve in future contract negotiation? So the lessons should be learned for those ones that are currently existing. Yeah, I agree that others have been signed in for the next 25 years, and in other countries that may not be possible even to renegotiate. But I mean, the importance is, what are we learning, and how can we use that knowledge to improve future negotiations? Yeah, so I think for me that's the lesson that is important there. We can't simply say because there's always this problem, then let it remain like that even for future negotiations. If we do that, then we are not learning. But as I said, it's a multiplicity of issues that needs to be looked into. So contract negotiations is one of those tools that we can use, but that does not substitute for all those other challenges, whether it is poor leadership, corruption, and all those other things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mtuso. Hope that was a good answer. So we'll go with our honorable member here, and then we'll come to you, ma'am. Apollinaire, and then we'll come to you, sir. And then we'll end it there. I think it's a good roundup. Yes, as the chair, you will close the interventions. I'm not sure. Oh, the back row. Okay. We'll come to that row. Just allow me to get through this, and then we'll come to that. My apologies, I missed you. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Merci de m'accorder la parole.
Thank you for giving me.
Je m'appelle honorable Apnifft Kingradi Burundi. Je vais d'abord vous remercier pour la parole que vous m'accordez. Si le rôle du Parlement, c'est les contrats miniers, je voudrais d'abord remercier à l'Apnifft pour ces travaux de sensibilisation des parlementaires qu'ils sont en train de faire. Nous savons que le Parlement joue des rôles principaux et d'ailleurs trois. Il y a la représentation du peuple, il y a la vote des lois, il y a le contrôle de l'action gouvernementale. Maintenant, je vais parler sur les deux rôles, la vote des lois et le contrôle de l'action gouvernementale. Le Parlement doit mettre les lois minières qui protègent les ressources naturelles du pays et mettre les structures fortes. Cela, ce que nous avons fait au Burundi, il faut qu'il y ait les lois sur la protection des ressources naturelles et des structures très fortes pour protéger ces lois. Il faut qu'il y ait les contrats signés, il faut qu'il y ait les contrats signés et vérifier si le gouvernement est en train de suivre ces contrats. Il faut mettre en place des modèles de contrats miniers qui est référence pour tout investisseur qui viennent pour investir dans ce secteur minier. Cela, c'est pour bloquer les mal intentionnés pour les négociations et la signature de ces contrats. Il faut recommander aussi au gouvernement africain de chercher des propres experts pour vérifier en amont et en aval les travaux d'extraction géologique. Le Parlement et les parlementaires doivent contrôler tout le processus de la mise en application du contrat avant, pendant et après pour voir les résultats de ce contrat et recommande de mettre ces résultats au budget national. Merci.
Thank you so much, sir. Next, we have honorable member here.
Okay. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for the floor. My name is Josephine Dragbo of Burkina Faso.
Je préciser que, en ce qui concerne mon pays, le code minier est à l'initiative des parlementaires. C'est les parlementaires qui ont conçu le code minier, bien sûr, en prenant en compte les avis de tous les acteurs qui interviennent dans le domaine. Quand le code minier a été adopté, le dernier code minier, en 2015, il y avait 3 innovations majeures qui nous avaient intéressés. Alimenter le fonds des collectivités territoriales, donc afin que les populations puissent bénéficier des retombées. Alimenter le fonds pour la restauration de l'environnement. Vous savez que l'exploitation minière détruit l'environnement. Et bien sûr, revoir le mode de calcul des royalties. Parce qu'au lieu que ça soit en fonction du volume de minerais extraits, il faut le faire sur la valeur. Parce qu'un gramme d'or en 2015 n'a pas la même valeur qu'un gramme d'or en 2022. Et de 2015 à 2018, nous nous sommes battus pour que cela soit effectif. C'est-à-dire que le refus des investisseurs miniers à appliquer la loi, à savoir alimenter le fonds des collectivités, alimenter le fonds de l'environnement, ils ne l'ont pas fait. Pendant 3 ans, on a utilisé tout ce qu'on pouvait faire légalement en tant que député, à savoir interpeller le gouvernement par des questions écrites, des questions orales. Ça n'a pas abouti. Donc, nous avons impliqué la société civile. Nous avons une ONG très forte en matière de défense des populations en ce qui concerne l'exploitation minière. Et nous avons aussi impliqué les médias. Donc, les plateaux télé ont été pris d'assaut, les journaux, bon, on en parlait partout. Finalement, ça a influencé et ça a eu un impact. Donc, depuis 2019, le fonds des collectivités est alimenté. Maintenant, bon, on nous a dit récemment que le fonds de l'environnement aussi est alimenté. Ce sont des pistes aussi, parce que la lutte n'est pas uniquement au niveau des parlementaires. Il faut que nous ayons des alliés. Et nous, les parlementaires, nous sommes limités dans notre lutte. On nous dit, pour le suivi, il faut interpeller. Vous interpellez, s'il n'y a pas d'action, vous faites comment? Donc, il faut trouver d'autres acteurs qui pourront nous aider à avoir des réponses, des solutions à ce qui nous préoccupe. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Je viens de suivre, c'est Apollinaire Nishimbele, membre du comité de pilotage, ancien cadre du Parlement du Burundi. Je viens de suivre avec intérêt les différentes interventions. Et je suis étonné que personne n'a parlé des partis politiques. Moi, avec mon expérience politique, je sais que je suis conscient que les députés, très peu de députés de parlementaires sont indépendants ou prennent des décisions indépendamment de les partis politiques. Alors, moi, j'aimerais que donc la sensibilisation commence par les partis politiques. Parce que il est vrai que, heureusement, beaucoup de membres de Parlement sont quand même, ont des rôles très importants, stratégiques dans les partis politiques, mais peu de décisions ou peu de résolutions dans les assemblées nationales ou dans les parlements sont acceptées ou adoptées indépendamment des décisions des partis politiques. Sinon, certains parlementaires peuvent même se voir exclus de leur parti politique s'ils vont à l'encontre des décisions des partis politiques. Donc, pour moi, la recommandation serait que les leaders des partis politiques soient impliqués dans le processus. Parce qu'on sait comment les multinationales négocient les contrats. Avant de venir en Afrique, ils négocient d'abord avec les politiciens, les leaders des partis politiques, et les contrats sont prédéfinis à partir de là. Et ils viennent à l'Assemblée, au Parlement, quand c'est déjà terminé, c'est pour dire oui. Il n'y a pas de débat, ce sont des formalités. Dire que les parlementaires seraient indépendants dans les résolutions ou dans le vote de loi, ça serait utopique. Oui, ça devrait être ainsi. Et ils devraient représenter le peuple au lieu de représenter les partis politiques. Mais ce n'est pas ce qui est pratique, ce n'est pas ce qui est fait. Alors, la recommandation, peut-être vis-à-vis de TGN, vis-à-vis des alliés, vis-à-vis de nos partenaires, serait aussi de sensibiliser les leaders des partis politiques en Afrique. Parce que les multinationales savent comment corrompre les leaders des partis politiques et les leaders des partis politiques donnent des ordres aux parlementaires. Ça, c'est connu de tous. C'est pourquoi notre présidente d'Apnifft disait qu'il faut d'abord revoir comment les partis politiques sont organisés en Afrique. C'est là où il y a le problème. Ce n'est pas au niveau parlementaire, c'est au niveau des partis politiques, au niveau politique. Voilà, merci.
Thank you so much. So I've been informed lunch is starting. So what I'll do is I'll go to the last row just to get one or two views, just for the spirit of inclusivity, and then the chair will close. I can give Honorable Pasha 30 seconds. So please, 30 seconds each. 30 seconds from there. And anyone else? Is there anyone else in the last row? Okay, so Honorable Member, 30 seconds, and then we'll come to you, and then Madam Chair, you close. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Hudson Mabet, Member of Parliament from Zambia. I mean, from Kankoyo, on the Copper Belt, where there's a lot of mining activities. In fact, in my constituency, there is one of the biggest mine, the oldest mine in Zambia, which produces the second largest producer of copper. But unfortunately, there's been a scandal there, which even today we don't seem to understand what happened between Glencore and the government. There is a bill, I can say there is a loan of 1.5 billion on unfinished projects, which Glencore claim. And the government has been put in a tight corner to ensure that whoever wants to come and invest in that mine, they have to clear off that debt. This has put the mine in serious condition. And the other agreement is the same mine buys all the copper. Glencore buys, they are no longer mining it, but they're the only one allowed to buy copper from the same mine. They determine the price at which they're buying the copper. When copper had increased to 9,000 metric tons, the mine was still selling at 3,500, the odd price. So that has really put the mine in serious financial situation, so much that that mine is almost closing down. Now the question I want to pose is, just like here in Zambia, there's been, as part of the debt restructuring program, there's been a credit control bill where members of parliament, the finance minister, whenever the government wants to borrow, or any institution being run by the government, they have to bring that the request to borrow money through parliament so that parliament can provide oversight. How easy is it for us to also introduce a bill which is going to make it easy for members of parliament to get involved in the agreements the mines are undertaking? Because I believe with that Glencore deal was brought to parliament, none of the members of parliament would have agreed to such a scandal. So how can we increase our participation in the deals the government makes with the investors in our country? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable. Honorable Chitakwacha.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I will be fast. Yes, I'll be fast. I just want to contribute. Thank you. I just want to contribute towards the questions that were given by my brother, incoming Honorable Mtuso. I want to highlight the first thing that we face as members of parliament is secrecy in terms of these deals. You realize that most of these deals, they are not negotiated by parliament at all. Not even parliament is informed, but parliament will just be involved at a later stage where either they need rubber stamping or the minister is seeking condonation. And you see that some of these deals or some of these contracts are done when either the house is adjourned and the parliament is not sitting, but contracts are signed, or either the executive has gone to a visit in another country and they are doing what they're doing there. They come back there with assigned contracts. And that has been the problem. And other contracts, you see that they were signed during COVID time, where there was lockdown, but the executive was still operating, and Parliament was paralyzed. So, what should we do? What should we do, given that there's this secrecy that is around it and this opaqueness or material? What should we do as parliamentarians? Because when this then comes to the House for condonation, we debate and debate and debate, but at the end of the day, majority carries the day. If you are coming from a minority part, it means you can't do anything. And those from the ruling party as well, they can also not debate further, or they can also not try to stop even the minister, because they come from the political party, and there's also whipping, and that whip and that sorted whip comes very strongly and painfully. So we have a challenge as members of parliament when we look at those mining contracts. That's where the biggest challenge is. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable. Honorable sir, at the back there, I think he had a hand. Can you just give your intervention for 30 seconds, please?
Okay, thank you. I thought I had given my privilege to the last speaker. Can I use the Portuguese translator that since we started here, I've never exercised this speaking in Portuguese, so I will speak in Portuguese so that they can translate for me. And maybe my ideas also will flow easily if I speak in my own language.
Yes, please.
Bom, eu acompanhei a intervenção que foi feita e...
Some feedback. Not sure. I'm not sure what's happening. Is it better now? Is the interpreter...
Alors?
Okay, he's saying it's good.
Okay.
I hope the problem was not with the language of Portuguese. Então, estava a dizer que acompanhei muito atentamente a intervenção e cumprimento muito o apresentador. A questão que nos é colocada me parece trazer-nos várias diferenças.
Can anyone hear? No, we can't follow. Oh, you can. Okay, then it's the machines. Okay, please proceed.
Okay, maybe they have to switch the channel into Portuguese. Keep trying.
But I think in the spirit of inclusivity, if some can hear, please proceed in Portuguese.
Oh, but
Can you hear? How many can hear?
But,
okay, that's a good number.
But the others cannot. So then I will try to do it in English then.
Okay,
no
that's
problem.
fine.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I was saying that I followed attentively the presentation, and I came to the conclusion that, one, maybe the difference in our judicial systems also may have an impact on how we approach these issues. So some from the common law system and some from the Roman system are different. For example, in Mozambique, which we follow the Roman system, not the common law, agreements between government and a private entity, if the government is not imposing its power, that is considered private business. In that case, there's little room for the public offices to intervene because it is done on a voluntary basis between two parties. And only if the two parties disagree, then they can go to court. Unless the government is present in that agreement, has a stake, and the other party also acknowledge that is negotiating with the state and that is no longer a private business, assume and accept that the state can impose its power. That's when we say, for example, if the government says, no, we have to renegotiate this contract at a certain period of time. Then the other part, if they have no choice, because the government is imposing its power, then either they accept to sign the deal or give up. So I would like to learn from our friends of Tanzania when the government imposed its power to say the contract will be negotiated a certain period of time. What was the result? Was there any positive sign after that, or there were some backlashes? And the other issue that comes when we are faced with this issue of the reports on doing business. Everything that we do, we try to rank higher on doing business and facilitating everything so that the business can be considered, the legal framework of the country will be seen as favorable for business. So in the system where we are in Mozambique, for example, and I believe in other countries also, we have to assume that the government is the executive and they are elected to implement a certain program. And in their way, to implement that program, they need the resources from everywhere. And how do we...
Sorry, Honorable, can I just ask, I'm being told that people are waiting online, just 15 seconds, and then you close your intervention.
Oh, okay. No, then let's close it.
Okay.
I think I'll have an opportunity to discuss with the President and other colleagues of our lunch or somewhere else.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your understanding. Madam Chair, just 30 seconds, please.
Thank you. Cooper, I'll try and be quick. I think I want to wrap it up with where the presenter started, and thank you very much for your presentation. The problem we face with why mineral resources are not translating to an actual resource for development is that the spirit of Pan-Africanism is dead in this continent. We have leaders who want to dance to amapiano and take videos of themselves and be popular. It's glamorous for them to be leaders. It's no longer leaders who want to die. Magufuli knew he was going to be killed, people. He said it many times before he was killed, but he did not flinch. So our leaders don't want to die. Now I want to propose 4 things quickly. Next time you clap for a president, even if they're in your party, ask yourself, is this man going to die for this country? Or it's just about glamour for him? Two, MPs unite. Can we stop putting party politics above the country and the future of your children? Because the executive is not making a mistake. They know what they are doing. So you are getting impoverished. You are singing for a man who's got resources in Switzerland. You can't even afford to take your kids to a country next door. But you are clapping for that man and you are defending that man. Three, there is something, I think Mukupa will like it. It's called Mineral Resource Governance Charter. I'll say it again. Mineral Resource Governance Charter. It is online. There is part of it that talks about domestic foundations for resource governance. It will give you the 12 steps as an MP you need to know for you to be able to have a say in the mineral resource governance of your country. At least it will educate you, because it's not just the charter. They tell you everything that goes with it. The last thing is Apnifft is exactly that platform that allows you members to unite across party line and fight against illicit financial flows. And I think lastly, can we just care for this continent a little bit more than we care for our parties? We shall go a long way. Thanks, Mukupa.
Thank you so much, Honorable. I think that's a fitting end, and we will proceed to lunch now. Thank you so much, Mutuso. If you need more information, Mutuso is still with us, but also there were brilliant recommendations from Tanzania. Please let's interact and share information about our countries. So thank you, honorable members. Enjoy your lunch. Oh, lunch, we go to the room called Mupani 2 on the left, and then we reconvene at 2:45. What's the time? Yeah, what? Okay, 2:45, right? So please, I think we allowed this conversation to flow, but please let's eat quickly so that then we are not punished for allowing more time to engage. Thank you, honorable members.